There is something deeply satisfying about watching a powerful person get knocked off their pedestal by a cartoon made of construction paper. That specific kind of satisfaction, where you're watching a show created in 6 days by two guys from Colorado dismantle someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars, is a unique feeling that no other television program has ever truly replicated. And South Park has been doing it for almost 3 decades now, episode after episode, season after season, targeting the most famous, most protected, most lawyered up people on the planet and reducing them to something absurd, something human, something funny. Tonight we are going through every major time South Park looked at a celebrity ego, one of those enormous, galaxy-brained staff of publicists behind you, the entourage-protected celebrity egos, and just quietly deflated it. We are going through the stories behind those episodes. The reactions, the fallout, the moments where the famous became the flustered. We are doing it slowly, with detail, letting each story breathe, because the best thing about a long night and a good story is that neither of them need to rush. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's let South Park do what it has always done best. Section 1. Tom Cruise and the Closet. He refused to leave. Let's start with what is, by almost any measure, the most consequential, celebrity-targeted episode South Park ever produced. Not just because of what happened in the episode itself, but because of the avalanche of real-world events that followed. And what those events revealed about how fame, power, money, and the law all operate when a comedy show points a cartoon finger directly at one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. It was November 16th, 2005. Season 9, Episode 12. Trey Parker and Matt Stone had been working on South Park for 8 years by this point. 8 years of poking every sacred cow within reach. 8 years of generating the kind of controversy that lesser networks would have flinched away from. But this one was going to be different, because this time they weren't just targeting a religion or a social trend or a moment in the news cycle. They were targeting Scientology, which is simultaneously a religion, a cultural phenomenon, a Hollywood power structure, and one of the most litigious organizations in American legal history. And they were doing it through the lens of one of its most famous adherents, Tom Cruise. The episode is called Trapped in the Closet, and the title operates on at least 3 distinct levels of meaning, all running simultaneously, all feeding into each other in a way that is genuinely elegant even when wrapped in fart jokes and construction paper. The basic story goes like this. Stan Marsh wanders into a Scientology testing center looking for something free to do and ends up taking their personality assessment. The auditors look at his results and their eyes go wide. His Thetan levels, the measurements of spiritual vitality within Scientology's cosmology, are so extraordinarily high that they match only one other person ever recorded in history, the founder of Scientology himself, L. Ron Hubbard. Stan, the earnest, a perpetually bewildered fourth grader from Colorado, is declared the reincarnation of Scientology's prophet. This brings every significant Scientologist in the world to Stan's doorstep, including Tom Cruise, who arrives wanting to meet the man who is essentially his church's messiah. And here's where the joke that defines the episode begins. Stan, being Stan, is asked what he thinks of Cruise's movies. And Stan, being incapable of performing social niceties he doesn't mean, gives an honest 9-year-old assessment. They're okay. Not great. Just okay. And that verdict, plain, unvarnished, completely without cruelty, is enough to send Cruise into a spiral of wounded self-regard so severe that he retreats into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. What follows is 20 minutes of increasing desperation as everyone in the episode, Stan's parents, fans, Nicole Kidman, John Travolta, and eventually R. Kelly, tries to get Tom Cruise to come out of the closet. The phrase is repeated dozens of times in a dozen different registers, always entirely sincere on the surface and always carrying a second meaning running right beneath it. Tom Cruise won't come out of the closet. It became instantly iconic. It entered the cultural vocabulary the same day it aired. And the reason it worked on both levels simultaneously is because the show never once winks at the audience about what it's doing. It plays the double meaning completely straight, which somehow makes it funnier and sharper than any conventional punchline could have managed. But the Scientology content in the episode went even deeper than that. And this is the part that really rattled the organization. At one point in the episode, the president of Scientology pulls Stan aside and explains in detail the actual cosmological origin story at the heart of the faith. The story of Xenu, the galactic overlord, the volcanoes, the hydrogen bombs, the Thetans trapped in human bodies across 75 million years of cosmic history. And as this story unfolds in animated form, a caption appears on screen that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." Now, in 2005, that caption was more incendiary than it might seem today. Because at that time, the deeper doctrines of Scientology, the stuff about Xenu and the Galactic Confederacy, were not publicly discussed. They were closely guarded secrets, while revealed only to advanced members who had paid tens of thousands of dollars in coursework fees to reach the levels where they were trusted with the information. The Church of Scientology actively worked to keep this material out of the public eye, partly because they believed public exposure before a member was spiritually prepared for it could cause serious harm, and partly, one suspects, because the story sounds extraordinary when presented without the surrounding framework of Scientology doctrine to contextualize it. South Park just put it on television with a matter-of-fact caption, broadcast it to millions of households, and dared anyone to disagree with the accuracy. To protect the people who worked on the episode, Parker and Stone made a production decision that became one of the most talked-about behind-the-scenes moves in the show's history. The closing credits, which normally list the writers, animators, and voice cast by name, listed every single person involved in the episode as either John Smith or Jane Smith. Every one of them. The entire crew anonymized themselves in anticipation of Scientology's documented practice of investigating and harassing those who criticize the organization. Parker and Stone themselves became John Smith in the credits. It was a defensive move and a statement at the same time. "We know you will come after us," it said. "We made it harder." The episode aired to a rating of 9.1 on IMDb, which places it comfortably among the show's best-reviewed episodes of all time. Critical response was overwhelming. Media outlets that normally held South Park at arm's length as juvenile shock content were openly calling it brilliant. And then the pushback started. On November 17th, 2005, the day after the episode aired, a senior Scientology executive named Mike Render, who would later leave the organization and become one of its most prominent critics, wrote a memo to church leader David Miscavige. The memo outlined potential responses to the episode, including the possibility of legal action against Parker and Stone. The church ultimately decided not to pursue litigation, recognizing that their legal case was weak and that suing a cartoon would generate exactly the kind of additional public attention they were trying to avoid. Instead, they turned their investigative machinery toward the show's consultant. For the episode, Parker and Stone had brought in journalist Mark Ebner, who had spent years investigating Scientology and had written extensively about the organization's inner workings for Spy magazine and in his 2005 book Hollywood Interrupted. The church reportedly mounted a campaign to discredit Ebner, framing the episode as a vehicle for his personal vendetta rather than independent satire. A leaked document from a former high-ranking Scientology member later revealed something that sounds like it was pulled from a thriller novel. The organization had assigned people to surveil the South Park production offices. They tracked what catering service brought lunch to the building. They noted the makes, models, and license plate numbers of Parker and Stone's cars. They recorded where their parking spaces were. This was an organization that assigned literal investigators to a cartoon show, because it had depicted their cosmology on television with a caption reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." And then came the Closet Gate. The episode was scheduled for a rebroadcast on March 15th, 2006. And just before that broadcast was due to air, Comedy Central quietly pulled it from the schedule, replacing it with a rerun of the Season 2 episode Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls. The network's stated reason was that it was a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had announced his departure from the show just 2 days earlier. But multiple media outlets reported a very different story. That Tom Cruise had used his leverage as the star of the upcoming Mission Impossible 3, distributed by Paramount Pictures, to pressure Viacom, which owned both Paramount and Comedy Central, into pulling the episode. Cruise threatened, according to reporting at the time, to walk back from the promotional obligations for the film if the rerun went ahead. Neither Comedy Central nor Cruise ever officially confirmed this chain of events. Cruise's representatives denied it, but the timing was almost too perfect to be coincidental, and the entertainment press treated it as an open secret. Parker and Stone issued a response through their lawyer. They signed it as Trey Parker and Matt Stone, servants of the Dark Lord Xenu. Even their legal communications maintained the comedy. The Isaac Hayes story, which was tangled up in all of this, is one of the most genuinely heartbreaking chapters in the show's history, and it deserves to be understood properly rather than as a footnote. Hayes had voiced Chef, South Park's soul-singing school cafeteria employee, since the show's very first episode in 1997. He was beloved by the cast, the crew, and the audience. He was also a practicing Scientologist, and after Trapped in the Closet aired, a press release went out in his name announcing his resignation from the show, citing the show's intolerance toward religion. Matt Stone's response was sharp and honest. He pointed out that Hayes had worked on the show for years, had voiced Chef through episodes that mocked Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and virtually every other faith on Earth, and had never objected. The objection came only when Scientology was targeted. Stone called it 100% having to do with his faith. But the real story only emerged years later. In January 2006, before the resignation announcement, Hayes had suffered a severe stroke that left him unable to speak, unable to function independently, and in no condition to make decisions or write press releases. His son, Isaac Hayes III, later told The Hollywood Reporter what had actually happened. Everyone around Hayes at the time, his assistants, his publicists, his management team, were Scientologists. His son said that his father was simply not capable of quitting the show himself. Someone in his orbit had made the decision for him and tendered his resignation without his knowledge or consent. Matt Stone confirmed that this was what he and Parker had come to believe. Isaac Hayes died on August 10, 2008 from another stroke. He was 75 years old, and he never fully recovered from the first one. He never got to speak for himself about any of it. He and the show's creators never reconciled, not because there was anything real to reconcile over, but because the opportunity was taken from all of them by people who were supposed to be caring for him. Parker and Stone dedicated an episode of Season 12 to his memory. In July 2006, Comedy Central did eventually rebroadcast Trapped in the Closet, both at 10 Pacific Time and at 11 Eastern, and again in September of that year. Stone told the press that if the episode hadn't been put back on the air, there would have been serious problems, and they wouldn't have continued working with the network. Tom Cruise, for his part, has never publicly commented on the episode, not once in nearly 2 decades. And he played Stan's reaction exactly as written. He simply refused to come out of the closet. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. There's something I find genuinely calming about knowing there are people all over the world settling in for a long night like this one at the same time. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. It helps more than you know, and it makes sure you get the next one when it lands. Section 2. Kanye West and the joke that kept proving itself. Right, there's a very specific kind of comedy that only works when the target of the joke proves the joke correct by their own response to it. It is rare. It requires a combination of perfect setup, perfect timing, and a subject with enough genuine ego to step directly into the trap without ever recognizing it as a trap. South Park achieved this with Kanye West in 2009, and it has been achieving it again and again ever since because West continues, with remarkable consistency, to demonstrate exactly the thing the joke was about in the first place. The episode is called Fish Sticks. It is the 5th episode of Season 13. It aired on April 8, 2009, and it was watched by 3.1 million households, the most watched Comedy Central production of that week by over 1.2 million viewers. It was also, at the time of its release, the most watched South Park episode on the show's official website. The episode rated 8.8 on IMDb. It was a hit by every measure, and the way it got made is itself part of the story. Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and their writing collaborator Bill Hader, the Saturday Night Live actor who had been working as a consulting writer on the show since Season 12, were at a writer's retreat in Seattle. They had gone out to watch salmon, jumping in a local body of water the way salmon do in the Pacific Northwest, launching themselves out of the current in great silver arcs. And somehow, watching the salmon jump reminded someone of Kanye West's music video for his 2007 song, Touch the Sky, in which West had dressed himself like Evel Knievel, the motorcycle daredevil, and launched himself into the sky. The visual connection sparked something, and the thing it sparked eventually became a pun. A very simple, very juvenile pun. The kind of pun that takes 3 seconds to explain and 30 seconds to land. The joke, as it appears in the episode, goes like this. Jimmy Valmer comes up with it in his kitchen one afternoon, turning it over in his mind the way people turn over accidental wordplay when they realize what they've got. Do you like fish sticks? Yeah, do you like to put fish sticks in your mouth? Yeah, then what are you? You're a gay fish. And that's it. That is the whole joke. It is a pun on the phrase fish sticks, and it works because the lead-in question sets up a perfectly reasonable agreement chain before snapping the trap shut. The episode posits that this joke, once invented, spreads across the entire country overnight. Everyone hears it, everyone immediately understands it, everyone immediately finds it funny. Late-night talk show hosts run it, newspapers print it, the country is unified by this single piece of wordplay. Everyone gets the joke, everyone laughs. Everyone, that is, except Kanye West. West's portrayal in the episode is extraordinary in its specific kind of cruelty, because the cruelty is not about anything external to him. It's not about his clothes or his money or his fame. It's about the architecture of his ego. The episode's version of West hears the joke and doesn't understand it. Not just fails to find it funny, doesn't understand it. He takes it as a literal accusation, a direct attack on his character, a rumor being spread about him. He goes to a doctor to get biological confirmation that he has no gills. He grows increasingly violent and paranoid. He kidnaps Carlos Mencia, who has taken credit for the joke, and attacks him with a baseball bat before nearly decapitating him. He takes Jimmy Valmer and Cartman hostage and demands they explain what is wrong with him. And the explanation that Kyle offers for Cartman's version of this behavior, which the episode runs in direct parallel with West's storyline, is the actual thesis of the episode, stated plainly. Kyle says that Cartman has an ego so fragile, so fundamentally insecure beneath all the bluster, that it will perform any mental gymnastics necessary to protect itself. The ego convinces itself of things that aren't true. It rewrites memory. It takes credit it doesn't deserve. It cannot accept being the subject of a joke that it didn't authorize because the joke represents a crack in the armor, and the armor is everything. This is what the episode is saying about Kanye West. Not that he's gay, not that he's a fish. The sexual punchline is just the delivery mechanism. The actual payload is the observation that his narcissism is so complete, so total, so immune to external perspective, that he literally cannot parse a joke about himself. The joke floats over his head not because he's stupid in a simple way, but because his self-regard has constructed a kind of protective atmosphere around him that deflects anything that doesn't confirm his own grandeur. The episode ends with West accepting, with complete sincerity, that he must actually be a gay fish. Having run out of explanations, having eliminated every other possibility, his mind lands on the one conclusion that his ego can work with, that people aren't laughing at a pun. They are recognizing a fundamental truth about his nature that he has been denying all his life. He embraces this. He dives into the ocean. He hums a tune, synthesized and auto-tuned, swimming among the fish, kissing them, becoming one of them, finally at home. It is surreal and specific and absolutely ruthlessly precise about the way a certain kind of grandiosity works. Now here is where reality and fiction begin to blur in a way that probably no one fully anticipated. West's real-world response to the episode was initially measured. He blogged about it on the same day it aired, wrote that his feelings were hurt, but also wrote that it was pretty funny and that he was going to work on not being so defensive. That blog post, if it was genuine, was arguably the most self-aware thing West had said in years. And then, over the months and years that followed, the rest of his behavior proved the episode's point in ways that were almost uncomfortable to watch. In 2010, West recorded a song called Gorgeous from his album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which contains the line, "Choke a South Park writer with a fish stick." The album Watch the Throne, his 2011 collaboration with Jay-Z, contains a reference to the episode in the song Made in America. A leaked demo from his 2021 album Donda contains the line, "South Park had jokes about fish sticks. Till this day, the whole team can kiss this dick." That is 3 separate pieces of music across 11 years in which West is still responding to a joke from a single television episode. But the most illuminating moment came in 2019. In an interview with Big Boy TV, West was asked about the South Park episode. He conflated the pun with a homophobic slur. He demonstrated in real time on camera that he had never understood the joke. Not the version where he didn't find it funny. The version where the mechanism of the wordplay, the thing that makes it a joke rather than an insult, had never registered in his mind at all. The joke had gone right over his head in 2009, and 10 years later, it was still clearing altitude. He was still the episode. The episode was still true. The real comedic genius of fish sticks, and the reason it has such enduring staying power, is that it designed itself to be self-verifying. If West had laughed at it and moved on, the joke would have been funny once and faded. Instead, every time he references it, every time he responds to it, every time he demonstrates that he cannot simply absorb a pun and laugh at himself, he confirms the episode's central thesis. The ego that can't take a joke about itself will spend years proving why the joke was right. There is also a subplot in the episode about Cartman, who genuinely believes he helped write the joke when he absolutely did not. His memory of the creative process shifts and warps over the course of the episode until he is completely convinced that Jimmy's idea was his own. Kyle's final speech about Cartman's psychology is a masterclass in how the show can smuggle serious observation inside an absurdist plot. The episode won the most watched Comedy Central broadcast of its week. West referenced it in his music, and in 2019 he still couldn't explain why a fish stick joke would call you a gay fish. Some jokes just keep getting funnier. Section 3, Barbra Streisand and the First Real Enemy. Before Tom Cruise, before Kanye, before the royal couple from Canada, before any of the celebrity targets that would come to define South Park's relationship with fame and ego, there was Barbra Streisand. And unlike virtually every other celebrity that the show would go after over the next 28 years, Streisand was not random. She was not incidental. She was chosen. Specifically, deliberately, and with a depth of genuine personal distaste that Parker and Stone have been remarkably open about in interviews. The episode is Mika Streisand, Season 1, Episode 12. It aired on February 18th, 1998, and it drew 5.4 million viewers, which was a record high for the series at that point. Parker and Stone have said on the DVD commentary for the episode, in terms they did not soften, that essentially all the other celebrities the show had mocked up to that point had been chosen at random or out of a spirit of playful irreverence. Streisand was different. With her, it was, in their words, personal. Now, the reason went back to Colorado's Amendment 2, a 1992 ballot measure that amended the state constitution to prevent any jurisdiction within Colorado from recognizing gay and lesbian citizens as a protected class. The Supreme Court would eventually strike down the amendment in 1996 in the case Romer versus Evans, ruling that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. But in the years before that ruling, the amendment was both in force and deeply divisive, and Barbra Streisand had publicly denounced it in terms that extended from the amendment itself to the people of Colorado generally. She called them, according to the accounts Parker and Stone described, a bunch of hicks. She announced she would never visit the state again and called on other entertainers to boycott it. Parker and Stone, who grew up in Colorado, had heard this and filed it somewhere. They were students at the University of Colorado in Boulder when the amendment passed, and Streisand's blanket condemnation of the state and its people landed differently on them than it might have landed on someone from somewhere else. The amendment on itself was discriminatory, and the Supreme Court agreed with that assessment. But there is a distance between opposing a specific law and calling an entire state's population hicks and pledging never to set foot there again. Parker said in commentary that he also simply finds her singing voice irritating, which contributed to one of the episode's more memorable recurring bits. But the Colorado comment was the root. That was where the genuine distaste came from. But the episode is a full-scale parody of Japanese kaiju cinema, the genre of giant monster films most famously associated with Godzilla and its extended cinematic family. The premise involves the boys discovering an ancient Anasazi artifact called the Triangle of Zinthar during a school field trip to an archaeological dig. Cartman finds it, immediately decides it's worthless, and throws it away. Kyle picks it up, and the discovery attracts the attention of film critic Leonard Maltin, who arrives in South Park with a warning. If Barbara Streisand has seen the news report about the triangle, the boys are in terrible danger. This is one of the episode's cleverest structural moves. Leonard Maltin, a real person, the actual film critic, is presented as a kind of guardian figure, a monster movie expert who has been tracking Streisand's movements for years and who arrives with the gravitas of someone delivering terrible news. The setup plays completely straight with the kaiju genre's conventions while being self-evidently absurd. Maltin then explains Streisand's backstory in terms that are absolutely serious within the episode's logic. Her mother was a jackal, and her father was an insurance salesman, and if she gets her hands on both halves of the Diamond of Pantheus, she will transform into Mecha Streisand and conquer the world. Streisand, disguised, tricks the boys into coming to her mountain condo. Once she has them in her power, she deploys her most effective weapon. She begins to sing at them. The boys writhe and scream. Cartman gives up the triangle purely to make her stop. She assembles the diamond, transforms and proceeds to destroy South Park in the manner of a Japanese movie monster, massive and mechanical and terrifying, with her own face on the enormous robot body. The resolution involves Leonard Maltin transforming into a giant robot hero, Sidney Poitier transforming into a fire-breathing turtle, and ultimately Robert Smith of The Cure transforming into a giant moth that defeats Mecha Streisand by punching her in the nose and sending her flying into the stratosphere to explode. Robert Smith, the actual Robert Smith of The Cure, who provided his voice lines over the telephone without being told the context and only discovered the plot when the episode aired, apparently said afterward that nothing in his career had meant as much to his younger nieces and nephews as the fact that he had been the savior of South Park. The Japanese lyrics sung during the battle, written by Parker, who speaks Japanese fluently, translate roughly as, "Barbara, Barbara, she's a terrible person, Barbara." During the sequence where Streisand undergoes her transformation, the sung lyrics translate to, "Barbara, Barbara, the person we hate the most. Barbara, Barbara, you have a big nose." The episode also reveals that inside Streisand's mountain torture chamber, prominently displayed, is a photograph of her with Satan. Streisand's real-world response came in a May 1998 interview with Mirabella magazine, and it is revealing in its own way. She said she hadn't been aware the show existed until she read about her portrayal in Time magazine, and that while she enjoyed satire and parody in general, citing the film In and Out as an example of comedy she found funny and not mean-spirited, she worried that shows like South Park and Beavis and Butthead added to the cynicism and negativity in culture, particularly for children. She wondered aloud if it sent a message to young girls that any woman who accomplishes something is portrayed as the incarnation of self-centeredness and greed. Parker and Stone's response was to make another episode that featured Streisand in a recurring gag called Spooky Vision, in which a photograph of Streisand's face was placed in all four corners of the television frame for the duration of the Halloween episode Spooky Fish. They advertised the episode in the weeks before broadcast by promising something so terrifying it couldn't even be described. That the reveal was just Streisand's face staring from the corners of the screen. The show was officially at war. She would return in the 200th and 201st episodes of the show, as part of the class action celebrity lawsuit assembled by Tom Cruise, back in her Mecha Streisand form. By that point, the name Mecha Streisand had entered the show's mythology so deeply that it appeared in its own right in the video game South Park, The Fractured But Whole, 2 decades after the original episode aired. The Streisand relationship also gave rise to something inadvertently poetic. There is an internet phenomenon known as the Streisand effect, named after a 2003 legal dispute in which Streisand sued a photographer to suppress aerial photographs of her California coastline home. The lawsuit and the resultant media coverage caused far more people to seek out and view the photographs than ever would have found them otherwise. The name stuck. The Streisand effect became shorthand for the phenomenon where attempting to suppress information causes it to spread more widely than it ever would have without the suppression attempt. And Streisand herself, when asked about it in later years, acknowledged she was aware of the effect named after her. The connection to South Park is not direct, but there is something fitting about it. The show's relationship with Streisand, born from her public dismissal of an entire state's population, grew into one of the most enduring celebrity show grudges in television history, in which she became a recurring symbol of a specific kind of swollen self-regard, the kind that turns the person who holds it into a monster when threatened. And the more she said about it, the more the conversation spread. The episode aired more than 27 years ago. Streisand has not been to Colorado, and Mecha Streisand lives on in the show's lore. Section 4. Paris Hilton and the Mirror That Didn't Flatter. In December 2004, Paris Hilton was the most famous woman in the world who wasn't famous for anything in particular. That is not a glib observation. It was genuinely, confusingly true. She was the heiress to a hotel fortune. She had appeared on a reality television show. She had a sex tape that had been released and monetized. Without her consent, she had a small chihuahua named Tinkerbell who accompanied her everywhere. And she was ubiquitous. Magazine covers, gossip columns, red carpets, product endorsements. You could not be culturally aware in 2004 and be unaware of Paris Hilton. And South Park had something specific to say about that. The episode is Stupid Spoiled Horror Video Playset, Season 8, Episode 12, which aired on December 1st, 2004. The title alone tells you where this is going. Parker and Stone have said in DVD commentary that this was one of the rare cases where they had a genuine personal objection to someone, not just a comedic target of opportunity. Matt Stone later said, when told that Hilton had described herself as flattered by the episode and hadn't watched it, that the response showed how deeply troubled she was. He wasn't trying to be funny when he said it. Now, the episode begins with Paris Hilton arriving in South Park to open a new store called Stupid Spoiled Whore, a retail franchise marketed explicitly to young girls. The store sells everything a child would need to mimic Hilton's public persona. Lewd clothing, a perfume called Skanke, and a board game called The Stupid Spoiled Whore Video Playset, a reference to the night vision sex tape that had entered the cultural conversation against Hilton's will. The fourth-grade girls in South Park immediately lose their minds over it. They want to dress like Hilton. They want to talk like Hilton. They want to be Hilton. The only holdout is Wendy Testaberger, who looks at Hilton's arrival in town and asks the question that drives the entire episode. What does she actually do? No one has an answer. She's super rich, someone says. How she's totally spoiled and snobby, says someone else. She's famous, says a third. The crowd simply cheers. While the girls spiral deeper into imitation, Hilton's focus lands on Butters Stotch, who she encounters at one point and decides she wants as a replacement pet. Her previous pets, as Butters discovers in a photo album in her limousine, have all found their own solution to living with Paris Hilton. One dog shot itself, one hung itself, one slit its wrists, another stepped in front of a bus. Hilton offers Butters' parents $200 million for him. His father promptly spits his coffee. His mother, initially reluctant, is slowly won over. His father tells Butters he'll let him stay if he can match the offer himself. He suggests coal mining. The episode also depicts Hilton, throughout, coughing up what Parker confirmed in DVD commentary is meant to be semen. It is gross. It is maximally uncharitable. It is the most cartoonishly grotesque version of her public persona turned up to the highest possible setting and left to run. The episode's moral arbiter is Mr. Slave, the show's recurring character who had appeared as Mr. Garrison's flamboyant partner, and who was by any objective measure the most explicitly sexual character in the show's cast. And the joke is that Mr. Slave, who had done things on camera that would make most television networks' legal departments hyperventilate, is appalled by what Hilton represents to young girls. He shows up at the girls' party, looks around at the 12-year-olds pretending to be Paris Hilton and tells them directly, being a whore is not something you should aspire to. And he says that his own depravity is not something to be admired or imitated. He says it's supposed to be a bad thing. The joke is that the actual degenerate in the room is the only adult willing to say that children shouldn't take this particular person as a role model. The climax is a whore-off between Mr. Slave and Paris Hilton to determine who is objectively the bigger whore. Hilton loses. Mr. Slave wins by inserting her into his body entirely. Inside, she meets the Frog King, who tells her to go to the small intestine to find the Sparrow Prince, who can guide her to Catatafish, who will help her escape. It is some of the most gleefully deranged imagery in a show that does not lack for deranged imagery. When the episode aired, Hilton claimed publicly that she hadn't seen it and didn't need to because imitation was flattery. Ed Stone's response to hearing that has already been quoted here. The episode ranked 8.4 on IMDb based on thousands of user votes. The Guardian called it one of the top 10 episodes of the 2000s. What makes the episode more complicated to reckon with, viewed from the present, is Hilton's own memoir, Paris, the Memoir, published in 2023. In the book, she described watching the episode and feeling sick. She said that depicting her dog being shot had genuinely distressed her. She said that the episode's characterization of her as a stupid, spoiled whore, and the application of that phrase to Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Tara Reid, and the young girls who admired them, upset her more than anything else in it. She also wrote about the sex tape, which was made when she was 19, and which was distributed and monetized without her consent, and described the experience of having the full weight of public contempt land on her rather than on the people who released it. This is the part that sits in a complicated place. The episode's target was a specific public persona, a specific cultural phenomenon, a specific moment in which an industry was packaging and selling a certain kind of performance of femininity to children. That critique was valid, and it landed. But the person inside the persona had been violated in a way that the episode, which used the sex tape as satirical raw material, didn't engage with. Stone and Parker later acknowledged there had been celebrity targets the show had gone after too hard, and some critics have pointed to Hilton as one of those cases, not because the cultural observation was wrong, but because the degree of contempt expressed for the individual exceeded what the satirical purpose required. That tension between hitting a valid target and the human cost of the impact is something South Park has grappled with across its history. Hilton's memoir added texture to the conversation. It didn't change what the episode was about. It just reminded everyone that the people on the other side of the screen are people. The stupid spoiled horror store, by the way, is still referenced in South Park mythology decades later. And the episode's actual point, that celebrity culture was selling a version of female identity to children that treated attention-seeking as the highest aspiration, that turned deliberate self-degradation into a brand, aged with uncomfortable accuracy as the years went on. Section 5. Mel Gibson, Sadomasochism and the Art of Getting Your Money Back. On March 31, 2004, while Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ was still playing in theaters and still generating the kind of cultural discourse that could fill a semester-long philosophy seminar, South Park aired one of its most elegant and structurally precise episodes about the relationship between art, belief, and the humans who produce both. The episode is The Passion of the Jew, Season 8, Episode 3, written and directed by Trey Parker. And where most celebrity takedowns in the show's history operate through one primary mechanism, exaggeration, direct mockery, satirical paralleling, this episode runs three distinct storylines simultaneously, each engaging with the Mel Gibson phenomenon from a completely different angle, and somehow all three land. The Passion of the Christ had been released in February 2004. It was one of the most controversial films in decades. Violently graphic in its depiction of the crucifixion, shot in Aramaic and Latin, deeply personal to Gibson, who had directed it with the explicit intent of depicting the suffering of Jesus as he believed it had actually occurred. It made over $600 million worldwide. It also generated accusations of anti-Semitism for its portrayal of Jewish religious authorities as the architects of Jesus' death. and it sparked a nationwide conversation about the line between genuine faith and the exploitation of religious imagery, between artistic sincerity and weaponized imagery. South Park had watched all of this and decided that the most interesting thing to say about it could only be said from three angles at once. The first storyline follows Kyle, who has heard Cartman insisting for months that the Passion proves everyone hates Jews. Kyle refuses to see the film on principle. He eventually relents and goes alone, and what he sees genuinely disturbs him. The film's graphic brutality, its framing of Jewish religious authorities, the sheer overwhelming visual force of it, Kyle exits the theater sick with guilt. He goes to Cartman's house and says the words Cartman has been waiting his entire life to hear. "You were right." Cartman prays before a Braveheart poster, an actual photograph of Gibson's face, with barely contained ecstasy. And then he immediately turns this victory into the founding document of a new movement. The second storyline follows Stan and Kenny, who also see the film and have an entirely different reaction. They think it sucked. Not that it was anti-Semitic, not that it was brilliant, not that it was spiritually transformative. It was a bad movie and they want their $18 back. Stan is absolutist about this. Getting your money back when a movie was bad is a matter of principle, he says. It's about holding bad filmmakers responsible. They track down the contact information for Mel Gibson's official fan club. Run, it emerges, by Cartman, who hangs up on them after they fail to recognize his voice, and determine that Gibson lives in Malibu. So Stan and Kenny travel to Malibu to knock on the door of one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood and demand $18. The third storyline is Cartman in full villain mode, dressed in a brown uniform that carries unmistakable echoes of a specific historical context. Speaking German phrases that he apparently believes are Aramaic to the credulous Christians at his Mel Gibson fan club meetings, Cartman is running what is transparently a proto-fascist movement disguised as a film appreciation society. The Christians at his meetings think they're gathering to celebrate their renewed faith. Cartman thinks he's finally figured out how to start the cleansing. The gap between what he's saying and what his followers think he's saying, he wants to exterminate the Jews, they hear it as some kind of prayer, is one of the most uncomfortable jokes the show has ever landed. Stan and Kenny reach Gibson's mansion and ring the bell. Gibson answers, and here is the reveal that makes the episode click into place. Gibson is insane, not metaphorically, not conceptually, cartoonishly, uncontrollably, completely detached from ordinary reality, insane. He chains himself to a torture rack and announces he won't give the money back no matter what they do to him. He is visibly thrilled by the prospect of being tortured. When Stan points out that they just want their $18 and didn't bring any torture implements, Gibson's excitement collapses into confusion. He chases them through the house, making Daffy Duck sounds. He follows their bus in the tanker truck from Mad Max 2, screaming in Klingon. The joke is that Mel Gibson made a 2-hour film about the most excruciating physical suffering imaginable, and his motivation had nothing to do with Christianity and everything to do with his personal investment in prolonged, graphic torture. The film isn't a religious statement, while it's the expression of a specific psychological obsession that happens to have found its subject in the crucifixion. Stan looks at Gibson bouncing off the walls of his Malibu mansion and says, "Dude, this guy is freaking Daffy." The episode ends with Gibson smearing his own excrement on a building wall in triumph. Kyle concludes that he feels much better about being Jewish now that he understands Gibson is just a giant, raving lunatic. The Christians in Cartman's proto-fascist rally are shaken free from Cartman's hold when they see Gibson's actual behavior. Cartman, still kneeling at the shrine of Braveheart, receives an organic objection from Gibson directly to the face. What the episode is really doing, underneath all of this, is making a precise and unsentimental argument about how we read intention in art. The people in the episode who were most moved by the Passion were moved either by genuine religious feeling that had nothing to do with Gibson's actual mental state, or by anti-Semitic impulses looking for permission. The film itself, stripped of either reading, was the product of a man with specific and unusual psychological preoccupations. The meaning the audience brought to it had almost nothing to do with its maker's inner life. And the maker's inner life, when encountered directly, dismantled every interpretation that had been projected onto him. Stan's argument that you go to church for theology and to movies for entertainment, and this movie failed to entertain and therefore you should get your money back, is an unusually clear statement of what art is owed to its audience and what it isn't. And The Passion promised an experience and delivered something else. And the consumer's right to redress doesn't care how much the producer believes in his own work. The episode aired just 2 years before Gibson's 2006 arrest for drunk driving, during which he made anti-Semitic statements to the officers that were extensively documented and reported. The episode had characterized him as a sadomasochistic maniac with deep personal animosity toward Jewish people. The real Gibson had said things during his arrest that the episode's most hostile interpretation of him had not fully anticipated. South Park, once again, turned out to have been prescient. Not through prophecy, but through the simple logic of taking what was already visible in someone's behavior and following it to its likely conclusion. Section 6. Britney Spears and the Lottery. No one wanted to win. There is a South Park episode that is difficult to watch in the way that truly good art is sometimes difficult to watch. Not because of shock value, not because of transgression for its own sake, but because it shows you something true that you already knew and hadn't fully acknowledged. And then it makes you sit with that truth for 22 minutes until you cannot look away from what it means. The episode is Britney's New Look, Season 12, Episode 2. March 19th, 2008. The episode was written and directed by Parker, and it is structured as a precise retelling of Shirley Jackson's 1948 short story, The Lottery, which concerns a small New England community that conducts an annual ritual selection of a random citizen who is then stoned to death by the rest of the town. The story's horror comes from the matter-of-fact normalcy with which the ritual is conducted. The way the community has simply integrated collective violence into its social calendar. The people who participate aren't monsters. They're just doing what their community does. They don't examine it. They don't question it. It's tradition. Parker and Stone transplanted this structure onto the media culture surrounding Britney Spears in 2007 and 2008, a period during which Spears' very public mental health struggles had become the dominant story in American celebrity journalism. The shaved head, the umbrella, the custody battle. The paparazzi everywhere she went at every moment, profiting from every photograph of her distress. It was a kind of collective, mediated cruelty that everyone participated in without anyone quite saying they were being cruel. The episode begins with Stan and Kyle watching a news broadcast about something Spears was photographed doing. The anchor announces it with the same register of urgency as breaking international news. The boys learn that the photographer who got the shot was paid enormous money for it. And like children who don't yet have a fully developed moral framework but do have a fully developed economic one, they decide they want in. They go to find Britney Spears and photograph her for money. They gain access to her hotel room by claiming to be her children. And when Spears turns around and sees what she believes are her kids, 2 boys who look nothing like her holding cameras, she holds them and cries. And it becomes clear in that moment that she is exhausted in a way that goes down to her bones. The media pressure, the constant scrutiny, the loss of privacy and dignity, the inability to be anything other than material for someone's photograph. It has reduced her to this. Clinging to 2 strangers because for a moment they looked like comfort. When she realizes they're not her children, she takes a shotgun from under her bed and shoots herself in the head. She survives. Barely. With most of her head missing. And the episode's darkest joke begins. The media reports on her condition as her new look. Columnists weigh in on whether it suits her. Her manager books her for a recording session and a performance at the MTV Video Music Awards. The performance, conducted by someone who is barely alive and who has survived attempted suicide, is met with jeering and cruelty from the crowd. Everyone comments on her appearance. No one addresses what has happened to her. Stan and Kyle feel the weight of having contributed to this, even in their small way, and spend the rest of the episode trying to protect her, trying to get her somewhere safe. They get her on a train toward the North Pole. They think they might be outrunning the story. And then the train stops in a small town, and the people of the town come out, and it becomes clear that this has been organized, that this is the point, that this is what the whole structure has been building toward. The townspeople explained to Stan and Kyle that their community, like all communities, requires ritual sacrifice. In more primitive times, they would stone someone. Now they simply photograph a chosen person until she dies. As the crowd closes in, Kyle makes his case, says it's wrong, says she's already been broken. The townspeople consider this. One of them agrees. The kid is right. This has gone on long enough. And then they keep photographing her anyway because the ritual isn't about logic. It's about harvest. It's about what the community has agreed, without quite agreeing, it needs. Brittany is photographed to death. The harvest is bountiful. In the final scene at the supermarket, a news broadcast mentions that Miley Cyrus is rising rapidly in popularity. Randy Marsh looks at the television with a familiar expression. Stan and Kyle, exhausted and defeated, reluctantly join the crowd in their chant. The cycle has already begun again. When the episode aired in 2008, it was received with mixed reviews, as some critics called it dark and uncomfortable without being funny enough to justify the darkness. Some felt it was exploiting Spears' real crisis for entertainment, and some noted with a certain uncomfortable accuracy that many of the outlets that dismissed the episode had also run gossip coverage of Spears' breakdown in considerable detail. In 2021, the documentary Framing Britney Spears was released by the New York Times, and it became a cultural flashpoint. It examined the conservatorship that had been imposed on Spears, the years of control over her finances and her person, the systematic way in which the media had covered her breakdown as spectacle rather than as a person in crisis. The documentary was praised for exposing the media's complicity in what had happened to her. And people went back to the South Park episode and found that it had said all of this in 2008. It had named the mechanism, the ritual selection, the requirement that someone be destroyed for the community's entertainment, the way the destruction is dressed up as something else. And it had said it 13 years before the documentary gave the mainstream media permission to say the same thing. The episode had not been laughing at Britney Spears. It had been documenting, in the only language available to a comedy show, the thing being done to her and the people doing it. The boys who try to save her represent the part of us that knows this is wrong. The crowd that photographs her to death represents the part of us that watches anyway. Britney herself was apparently not fond of the episode, reportedly. She was upset enough that she contacted Seth MacFarlane, creator of Family Guy, and asked if he would be interested in producing an episode mocking South Park with her as a guest star. MacFarlane declined, citing his disinclination to start a feud with Parker and Stone, who he noted already had complicated feelings about Family Guy. The episode had been trying to protect her. She didn't know that, or couldn't see it from inside the experience of being depicted as someone who shoots herself in the head, which is, in its own way, the most South Park thing about the whole situation. Section 7. The Passion of Barbra Streisand continued, and the Return of the Monster. Streisand returned to South Park long after the first episode that bore her name, and each return deepened the mythology around what she represented in the show's universe. That she became less a celebrity target and more a recurring archetype, the embodiment of a specific kind of self-regard so inflated that it transforms into something destructive. The show found in her a figure useful enough to bring back for its 200th episode celebration, which alone speaks to the enduring weight the character carried. But before we revisit her return, let's sit with the broader pattern of what the show was doing with celebrity culture in the years between the original Mecha Streisand and all the episodes that followed. Because there's a through line connecting the show's most memorable celebrity targets that isn't just, here is someone famous who we find ridiculous. The show has a recurring interest in what might be called the ego trap, the condition in which enormous public success creates a feedback loop that disconnects a person from the ordinary experience of being a human being. Tom Cruise cannot come out of the closet because his self-concept requires that the world confirm his greatness continuously, and a single honest 9-year-old critique of his films is enough to send that self-concept into a kind of shutdown. Kanye West cannot understand a joke about himself because his ego has constructed a reality in which jokes about him are never jokes but always attacks, always rumors, always something to be countered and corrected rather than laughed at. Mel Gibson cannot simply make a film and let it be received how it will be received. He needs everyone to understand the enormity of what he created. He needs the suffering to be witnessed at the right scale, and the violence itself becomes the point. Barbara Streisand calls an entire state a bunch of hicks and promises never to return because her moral authority, in her understanding, extends to the geography of states whose voters disagree with her. In each case, the ego has become so large that it has lost the calibration device that most people use without thinking about it. The one that says, well, they're entitled to their opinion, or that's pretty funny, or I guess I came across badly there. The ego trap eliminates that calibration and replaces it with a defensive architecture so total that any input from outside has to be processed as either confirmation or attack. And comedy cannot survive that architecture from the inside. A comedy requires the ability to see yourself from the outside, to momentarily agree that you are also a little ridiculous, to laugh at the gap between how you imagine yourself and how you appear. The ego trap seals that gap permanently. South Park keeps returning to this theme across every season because it keeps finding new people who have fallen into it, and because the consequences keep being funny in the same way. Someone with enormous power and enormous reputation and enormous resources looks at a cartoon made of construction paper and rather than shrugging and moving on, launches the full weight of their authority at it, and the authority bounces off. The cartoon keeps running, and the authority is revealed to be somewhat less imposing than it appeared because it spent itself trying to stop a joke. But when Mecha Streisand returned in episodes 200 and 201, the 200th and 201st episodes of South Park aired in April 2010. She was one of many celebrities assembled by Tom Cruise to file a class action lawsuit against the town of South Park for years of mockery. The episode is essentially a greatest hits of everyone who had ever been genuinely offended or damaged by the show, gathered together to demand that the town bring Muhammad to them so that Cruise could steal Muhammad's power, the apparent ability to never be ridiculed. Every celebrity in the room wants what Muhammad has. They want immunity. They want to be the one person the show cannot touch. The irony is exquisite. These are the people who had the most resources, the most lawyers, the most leverage, and in some cases the most genuine power to damage the show and its creators. And what they want, ultimately, is simply not to be made fun of anymore. They want the protection that they believed their wealth and fame should have provided all along. They want the show to stop looking at them. South Park has never looked away. Section 8. Paris Hilton, the sequel. And what the parody predicted. Let's return to Hilton for a moment, because the story doesn't end with stupid spoiled whore video playset, and the decade that followed the episode has a strange relevance to what the episode was trying to say. In 2004, Hilton was the template. She was the original model for the influencer as cultural phenomenon, the person who becomes famous by being visible, who builds a brand from the performance of a persona, who monetizes the attention itself rather than any underlying skill or product. The show's critique was that this was being marketed to children as aspiration, as the highest form of achievement a girl could reach. The decade and a half that followed produced the Instagram era, the TikTok era, the reality television pipeline that sent hundreds of Hilton-adjacent figures into the cultural conversation. The word influencer entered common usage. The model that Hilton had more or less invented, fame as the product, the personal brand as the business, the audience relationship as the revenue stream, became one of the most economically significant models in entertainment. The thing the show had called stupid spoiled whore had, in its broader form, become an industry. This doesn't vindicate the specific way the episode treated Hilton as an individual. Her memoir makes it clear that the experience caused her real pain, and some of the episode's imagery goes beyond what the satirical purpose required. But the episode's structural argument, that this persona, scaled up and marketed to children, was something that deserved serious critical examination, aged into a critique that subsequent years made more rather than less applicable. Hilton herself, in the years after the period the episode addressed, gave interviews and eventually wrote a memoir that reclaimed her narrative substantially. She positioned herself as someone who had been performing a character, dumb blonde, party girl, walking spectacle, as a survival strategy in a media environment that had already decided what she was. But the performance had become so total that people forgot it was a performance, including, at times, her. The question of where the persona ended and the person began became genuinely unclear even to her. This is, in its own way, exactly what the episode was examining. The episode was furious at the persona and at the industry that amplified it. The episode wasn't, perhaps, sufficiently curious about what it was like to be the person inside it. Those are different concerns, and both are valid. And the fact that Hilton's own account, published nearly 2 decades after the episode, addressed many of the episode's concerns from the inside gives the whole thing a texture that a simple celebrity roast wouldn't have. One of the episode's minor strands is about Wendy, who refuses to follow the trend. So who keeps asking what Paris Hilton actually does? Who represents the part of the audience that hasn't yet been convinced to want what she's selling? Parker and Stone's choice to give Wendy the moral clarity in this episode is itself a choice. It says that the path out of the cycle isn't complicated. It just requires asking simple questions and being willing to tolerate the social cost of asking them. What does she do? Nothing that requires the level of attention you're giving her. What are you buying? The idea of being that kind of visible. Is it worth it? That's what the show was asking. That's still what it's asking. Section 9. The Passion of Kanye West. A Decade of Proof. Let's extend the Kanye thread because it is, across the years, the most comprehensively self-fulfilling celebrity roast in the show's history. It's not just that the Fish Sticks episode was accurate in 2009. It's that West spent the years after the episode providing increasingly elaborate confirmation of its central thesis, each confirmation more detailed and more specific than the last. The episode argued that West's ego had constructed a defensive reality so complete that humor could not penetrate it. That when confronted with a joke about himself, he couldn't process it as a joke, couldn't find the mechanism that allows most people to say, "Oh yeah, that's a fair point," and laugh. Instead, it registered as an attack, and the attack demanded a response, and the response proved the joke. In 2010, he rhymes about choking a South Park writer with a fish stick. In 2011, he acknowledges the episode in a song by saying, "South Park had everyone laughing." In 2021, in a leaked demo, he says the team can quote a specific phrase in reference to his displeasure. 11 years of musical references to a single television episode. 11 years during which West became one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful musicians of his generation, released multiple landmark albums, became a fashion icon, married into one of the most famous families in America, and still had not let go of the fact that a cartoon had made a fish stick joke about him. And then in 2019, he gave the Big Boy TV interview and demonstrated in real time that he had never actually understood the wordplay. He conflated fish stick with a homophobic slur, which is not what the joke is. The joke is a pun on fish sticks sounding like fish dicks. There's no other level to it. It's a children's joke. And West, who had been publicly wrestling with this children's joke for a decade, proved in that interview that he had never understood what it was. What makes this the most perfect celebrity roast in the show's history is that the episode didn't need to be right. It just needed to define the frame carefully enough that West's subsequent behavior would fill it. And West, with complete sincerity and no apparent self-awareness, filled it to capacity and then kept filling it. The other celebrity in the episode, Carlos Mencia, also responds on the same day it airs, writes on Twitter that they just made fun of him on South Park and that he enjoyed the parody. One sentence. Done. He understood the joke, shrugged, and moved on, and nobody talks about his response to the episode because it had no edges to catch on. West's response, which keeps going and going, became part of the cultural record. The difference between the two responses is the difference between the person who can take a joke and the person who cannot, and it is the most precise possible illustration of what the episode was about. Section 10. Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the privacy tour that wasn't. By February 2023, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had completed something that no former members of the British royal family had ever quite managed to do. They had turned the desire for privacy into the world's most public project. The Netflix documentary, the Oprah interview, the memoir Spare, the speaking engagements, the podcast, the social media presence, all of it was framed as the story of two people trying to escape media scrutiny, presented in formats specifically designed to maximize media scrutiny. The central paradox of their situation had become impossible to ignore, and South Park had never been shy about pointing at impossible-to-ignore paradoxes. The episode is the Worldwide Privacy Tour, Season 26, Episode 2, which aired on February 15th, 2023. The show stops short of using Harry and Meghan's actual names, instead presenting the Prince of Canada and his wife, a thinly veiled stand-in that fools precisely no one, and is not intended to. The show uses this slight fictionalizing not for legal protection, but because it allows the episode to be about the phenomenon rather than about specific people, which is how South Park works at its best. The Prince of Canada and his wife arrive in South Park seeking privacy and seclusion in a small mountain town. Yeah, their arrival is announced on the national news. They bring their brands, their consultants, their grievances. The prince has written a book called Wah, a direct reference to Harry's memoir Spare, in which he documents the royal family's mistreatment of him in extensive, specific, and very public detail. He carries placards to talk show appearances reading, "We want our privacy." His wife's sign reads, "Stop looking at us." At one point, the couple consult with a branding manager at a firm called Cumhammer. This is not subtle. The branding manager helps them develop their public identity, which is described as follows for the prince: royal, millionaire, world traveler, victim. For his wife, sorority girl, actress, influencer, victim. The word victim in both descriptions is not a mistake. It is the episode's diagnosis. That the episode runs this observation, that the performance of victimhood had become their primary public product, across multiple angles. The wife accuses various South Park residents of victimizing her. Who had initially been sympathetic, grows exhausted by the constant presence of the couple in the media and in his physical space. He tries to simply not care. She accuses him of victimizing her by not caring. When Butters inadvertently causes a small commotion that reflects poorly on her, she engineers a media response that makes Butters the villain. The machinery of public relations deployed against a 9-year-old. The episode's most precise moment comes when the prince, slowly, begins to question what he actually wants versus what he has been performing. He looks inside himself and finds something genuine there, but he looks inside his wife and finds that she is literally empty. The show doesn't make the wife a villain in a simple way. She is not depicted as evil, just as someone who has become entirely constituted by the performance of a public identity, who has nothing behind the curtain because the curtain is all there is. The prince wants something real. She wants to manage what people think of her, which is not the same thing. The prince ends up playing drums on the edge of a basketball court while the boys play, which is a quietly touching image. A prince who gave up a palace finding something genuinely calming in an ordinary afternoon. His wife is not present. She is somewhere optimizing a brand position. Meghan was reportedly upset and overwhelmed by the episode and did not finish watching it. And a spokesperson for the couple denied that they were planning legal action. Harry reportedly took it better, which tracks with the episode's characterization of them. The prince as someone capable of genuine self-reflection, however complicated, and his wife as someone who has built a self-concept too tight and too managed to permit the kind of laughter that self-reflection requires. The episode went viral the night it aired. Clips from it spread across social media within hours. It was trending worldwide. The couple who wanted privacy generated a global conversation about their desire for privacy by being on a television show that was now being watched by millions of people on every continent. The Streisand effect, named for South Park's original nemesis, applied perfectly to them. The thing the episode captured, which gave it its resonance beyond just the celebrity roast, was the specific cultural exhaustion with a kind of grievance celebrity that had emerged in the years before it aired. The willingness to commodify personal pain, to build a career out of narrating one's own suffering at the hands of powerful institutions, while being extremely careful to ensure maximum media exposure for those narrations. This was a phenomenon that had wider application than just Harry and Meghan. They were the most visible example of something that had become a recognizable pattern. And South Park, as it so often does, found the clearest and funniest way to name the pattern by looking at its clearest example. The episode is rated 8.3 on IMDb. It was the second episode of season 26, and it confirmed that after 27 years, the show's ability to identify the fault line in a celebrity's public image and apply precise pressure to it had not diminished. Section 11. The philosophy behind the punctured ego. At some point, watching enough of these episodes in sequence, you start to notice that the targets all have something in common that goes beyond simply being famous. The show doesn't go after all famous people. It goes after a specific subset of famous people, and the common denominator is something harder to define than money or visibility. Tom Cruise had a response to the mildest possible critique, a 9-year-old saying his movies were just okay, that involved locking himself in a closet. Kanye West spent a decade responding musically to a fish stick pun. Barbra Streisand dismissed an entire state's residents as hicks, and then complained that a comedy show was adding cynicism to culture. Paris Hilton called a scathing parody of her influence on children a form of flattering imitation without watching it. Mel Gibson needed a 2-hour film about graphic physical torture to express his religious devotion, and then chased 2 children through his house for demanding their money back. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sought privacy by talking about themselves, publicly, constantly, at enormous length. What connects them is a specific kind of relationship with outside perception. The ego trap, as the show keeps diagnosing it, is the condition in which the gap between how you see yourself and how others might see you has been sealed. There is no light coming in from outside. But the self-image is total and self-sustaining, maintained by enough wealth and enough handlers and enough ambient confirmation that it rarely gets genuinely tested. And when it does get tested, when the test comes in the form of a joke, which is the lightest possible form of external correction, the ego has no mechanism for processing it except as an attack. Parker and Stone have talked in interviews about the philosophy behind the show's celebrity targeting. They have said that they're not trying to destroy people, that most of the celebrity content comes from a place of genuine affection, mixed with specific observations about behavior they find interesting or strange. They have acknowledged that they sometimes go too far, that the Paris Hilton episode may have expressed personal contempt more than satirical precision, that the Indiana Jones episode from season 12 used sexual violence as a metaphor in a way that aged poorly. They are not immune to getting it wrong, but the underlying principle, that celebrity ego, specifically celebrity ego at the scale where it begins to generate its own gravitational field and pull other things into its orbit, is both funny and worth examining, has proven remarkably durable. The show has been doing this for 28 seasons, and the supply of material has never run low, because the ego trap is not a personal failing so much as a structural consequence of a certain kind of fame. You get enough money, enough handlers, enough confirmation, enough insulation from ordinary life, and the calibration device breaks. You stop being able to hear yourself the way others hear you. Yet the construction paper aesthetic of South Park is relevant here. Parker has talked about the fact that the show's crude animation is itself a kind of permission structure. It allows audiences to engage with sharp and sometimes devastating observations about real people because the medium signals unreality, signals playfulness, signals that this is not meant as a personal attack, but as a cultural observation dressed in a funny costume. The crude look gives the show a kind of rhetorical immunity that a more polished production wouldn't have. When a Pixar-quality animated character says something brutal about Tom Cruise, it feels cruel. When a construction paper cutout says the same thing, it feels like satire. This is also why the show's effectiveness depends on the celebrities it targets responding disproportionately. A shrug absorbs the joke. An overreaction amplifies it. Tom Cruise's alleged threat to tank a film's promotional tour, Scientology's documented surveillance of the production office, Kanye West's 11 years of musical responses, Mel Gibson's lawsuit threats, Barbra Streisand's Mirabella magazine interview warning about the show's effects on children. Every escalating response has added more material to the story, more confirmation of the underlying observation, more proof that the ego trap is real and the person in it cannot see the bars. Matt Stone said something in an interview that gets at this perfectly. He said that South Park has only ever needed to do one thing well to produce these celebrity moments. Notice something true about someone and say it out loud. The truth does the rest. If the observation lands, the person's response to it will confirm it. If it doesn't land, there's no response at all, and the joke fades. The disproportionate responses, the lawsuits threatened, the episodes pulled, the musical callouts, the memoirs written decades later about how much it hurt, are not evidence that the show went too far. They are evidence that it hit something real. This is also what distinguishes the show's best celebrity episodes from lesser celebrity roasts. A roast is about jokes. A South Park celebrity episode is about a thesis, and the joke is just the delivery mechanism. The thesis about Tom Cruise is that celebrity insulates a person from honest feedback to the point where a child saying a movie is just okay becomes an unbearable psychic event. The thesis about Kanye is that a certain kind of ego creates a closed loop where the difference between mockery and compliment disappears because everything is processed as a statement about the ego rather than as an external observation. The thesis about Barbra Streisand is that the same impulse that drives artistic achievement at the highest level, the absolute conviction of one's own importance and rightness, can curdle into something that mistakes personal preference for moral authority. These are not just jokes about individuals. They are observations about fame as a systemic phenomenon, about what happens when cultural and economic systems select for and amplify certain ego structures, about the human cost of the feedback loops those systems create. South Park keeps returning to these observations because they keep being true. Because every few years, a new celebrity steps into the same trap, and the show is there to document it. The construction paper kids from Colorado are still watching. They're still saying the thing nobody else will say. And the celebrities who can laugh at themselves have exactly that to show for it. The joke passes through them and disappears. The ones who can't, they become the episode. Section 12, the Bono episode and the other egos. Along the way. Before we bring this to a close, there are a handful of other celebrity moments in the show's history that deserve their own space because they illustrate the range of what the show has done with the ego concept and the different ways it has deployed its particular kind of satire against different kinds of fame. Bono, the U2 frontman and humanitarian activist, appeared in season 11, 2007, in an episode called More Crap. Randy Marsh has produced what appears to be the world's largest bowel movement, and the entire episode concerns the competitive world of record-breaking fecal achievements. The twist is that Bono, who obsessively pursues the status of being number one in every field he enters, is not in competition with Randy. Bono doesn't have the world's largest bowel movement. Bono is the world's largest bowel movement. He is not a man who is full of himself. He is literally a massive piece of crap. And his unceasing drive to be number one in every domain, music, philanthropy, politics, public consciousness, is the behavior not of a person who wants to improve the world, but of an excrement that cannot accept not being the most important thing in any room it occupies. The episode is cartoonishly reductive, deliberately so. Bono's humanitarian work is real and substantial. The show knows this. The joke isn't that his work is meaningless. The joke is that the combination of genuine achievement and relentless self-promotion and inability to simply let someone else have a record creates a portrait of a man who has confused being important with being number one, who can't let anyone else be number one, even in an obscure competition about nothing, because every time someone else is number one, it registers as a threat to his fundamental sense of his own worth. Bono, to his credit, gave an interview in which he said the episode was funny and that he was flattered. This is the correct response. This is exactly the move that diffuses the joke. He didn't chase anyone in a Mad Max truck. He didn't record a song about choking anyone. He laughed. And the episode passed. James Cameron appeared in season 16, 2012, in an episode called Raising the Bar, depicting him as a man of staggering self-regard who conducts all human relationships through the lens of what James Cameron would do, because he is James Cameron. The joke is the third-person self-reference taken to its logical extreme. The man so consumed by the mythological version of himself that he can only understand his own behavior as an expression of the James Cameron brand. Cameron responded during a Reddit AMA by saying the episode was funny and that it was like the writers had actually been on his ocean expeditions, except he had not made the crew sing songs about him. That last qualifier is endearing. He got it. He found the line between himself and the parody of himself. Jennifer Lopez appeared in a season 7 episode in 2003 in which Cartman uses a sock puppet named Manda to perform a Jennifer Lopez impression that becomes more successful than the actual Jennifer Lopez, eventually stealing her career. The episode was not kind. Parker, in DVD commentary, said he had heard from a friend on set of a Lopez film that she had been so upset by the episode that she had fired crew members who quoted lines from it on set. Hearing that people in her employ had been terminated for repeating a South Park joke apparently gave Parker considerable satisfaction. Lars Ulrich of Metallica appears in a Season 4 episode from 2000 called Christian Rockhard as a passionate advocate for protecting musicians' intellectual property from illegal downloading. So passionate that he spends his own money on things no regular person would think to spend money on, because he is apparently so wealthy that ordinary financial decisions have ceased to be meaningful to him. The episode is not really about Lars Ulrich specifically. It's about the disconnect between multi-millionaire musicians making public arguments about being unable to make a living when their lifestyle makes the argument somewhat difficult to sell. Ulrich found it funny. He has said so in interviews. And then there is Al Gore, who gets a special place in this story because he is the only celebrity the show has ever genuinely, not sincerely apologized to. His portrayal in the Man Bear Pig episodes beginning in 2006 depicted him as a self-aggrandizing, attention-seeking fool, warning everyone about an imaginary threat, the creature Man Bear Pig, which was an obvious metaphor for climate change, which Parker and Stone found overblown at the time. Gore was the punchline for years. In 2018, 2 episodes called Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal brought Man Bear Pig back. This time he is real. This time he is devastating, and the boys apologized to Al Gore for not taking him seriously. In an interview with Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, Gore was asked about the apology. He said he had initially thought Parker and Stone were nihilists, funny nihilists, but nihilists. And that when the apology came, he was genuinely impressed. He said it was a hell of a statement, and that he appreciated it. Parker and Stone had been wrong about something important, put it on screen, and said so. Out of character, in front of everyone. Gore being Gore, he said it with a certain self-satisfaction. But he also said thank you, and meant it. The show had made fun of him for 12 years and then corrected itself on air. How many shows do that? How many people do that? Section 13, why these episodes keep finding new audiences. There's something that happens every few years with this show's celebrity episodes. A new generation discovers them, and the discovery has a different quality depending on when you encounter it. If you saw the Fish Sticks episode in 2009, you experienced it as a sharp and funny observation about a specific person at a specific cultural moment. And if you discover it now, you experience it as something that was not just right then, but demonstrably increasingly right over time. A joke that has compounded interest across 15 years of West's subsequent behavior. The same is true of the Britney episode, which felt like dark comedy in 2008 and feels like documentation in 2025. The same is true of Trapped in the Closet, which felt like a bold provocation against Scientology in 2005, and now reads as a detailed account of exactly how the organization operates, confirmed by years of subsequent reporting from former members. The same is true of the Paris Hilton episode, which felt like a cartoon diatribe against a celebrity in 2004, and now reads as a precise account of a cultural template that produced an entire industry. South Park's celebrity episodes age differently from most satire because they're not primarily about moment-to-moment topical content. They're about structural observations that happen to be illustrated by specific people. The person is the example. The observation is the thing that lasts. And the other reason these episodes find new audiences is simpler and harder to articulate. There is something genuinely reassuring about watching a show that doesn't blink. In a media landscape where every outlet, every advertiser, every network, every platform is calculating the cost of saying something that might offend someone powerful, a show that has been saying those things for 28 years and is still here, still signed to a billion-dollar deal, still getting the highest ratings it's had in years, and still generating official condemnations from the White House, offers a specific kind of comfort. Not the comfort of agreement, necessarily. South Park has been wrong about things. It has said things that caused real harm to real people. It has sometimes deployed contempt when curiosity would have served better. But the comfort of watching something that trusts its own observations, that doesn't calibrate every joke against the potential reaction, that seems genuinely more afraid of being boring than of being wrong. That comfort is rare. And it compounds over 28 years into something that resembles a cultural institution. The celebrity episodes work because they're not really about the celebrities. They're about the conditions that produce a certain kind of behavior in a certain kind of person. And the celebrities are just the clearest examples available. Tom Cruise is not the point. The feedback loop that makes honest feedback unbearable is the point. Kanye West is not the point. The ego structure that turns a fish stick pun into a decade-long feud is the point. Barbra Streisand is not the point. The impulse to extend one's moral authority to places it hasn't been invited is the point. The construction paper kids notice these things. They say them out loud. They're still in South Park, and the celebrities are still walking into the frame, and the camera is still running. Section 14. The ego at the end of the world. Let's end here slowly, letting the story settle. There's a moment in the Fish Sticks episode where Kyle explains Cartman's psychology to him in terms so clear and so honest that Cartman doesn't hear them as being about him. He hears them as being about Jimmy. This is the final elegant joke of the episode. The diagnosis of the ego trap is delivered directly to the person in it, and the ego trap is so complete that the person can't receive it. Kyle tells Cartman, essentially, you have an ego so fragile and so defended that it will perform any mental gymnastics necessary to protect itself. You go through life rewriting memory, stealing credit, constructing a version of events in which you are always the central, most important figure. Because the alternative, being ordinary, being wrong, being sometimes ridiculous, is a thing your ego cannot survive. And Cartman hears this entire speech and concludes that Kyle is talking about Jimmy. He walks away having confirmed himself in his own mind. The most lucid, most accurate observation ever made about him has gone directly through him without landing. This is the shape of the ego trap at its most complete. Not that the person with the inflated ego is stupid, or unaware, or incapable of understanding the world around them. They may be extremely intelligent. Kanye West is extraordinarily creative and has produced genuinely important music. Mel Gibson made Braveheart and Apocalypto. Barbra Streisand has one of the most technically accomplished voices in recorded pop music. Tom Cruise has made genuinely great films and performed genuinely extraordinary physical stunts. The intelligence and the talent are real. If the ego trap doesn't eliminate them, it just means those capabilities are deployed in service of the ego rather than in service of the work, or the relationship, or the simple act of hearing what someone is saying to you. The celebrities that South Park has targeted over the years who have simply absorbed the joke, who have said, yeah, fair, that's funny, okay, have moved on. Their episodes exist but don't have the same resonance because there's no story after them. The joke lands and dissipates. The celebrities who couldn't absorb the joke generated years of additional material, additional confirmation, additional proof that the show had identified something structurally real. And the irony is that every piece of that additional material was generated by the celebrities' own attempts to defend themselves. The construction paper, the crude animation, the 6-day production schedule. The two guys from Colorado who started with a Christmas card made for $750 and ended up with a billion-dollar deal and an official White House condemnation. They have been saying the same basic thing since 1997. Your self-regard is not as interesting to the rest of us as it is to you. The gap between how you see yourself and how you appear is funny. Nothing is too sacred to examine, including you. And all the lawyers, and all the memos, and all the surveillance of parking lots, and all the musical references to fish stick jokes cannot seal that gap because the gap is the truth. And the truth doesn't stop being true when you hire someone to stop talking about it. We have been here for a long time tonight, and we've covered a lot of ground. On Tom Cruise in a closet that everyone was begging him to leave. Kanye West in an ocean with the fish he finally decided were his people. Barbra Streisand as a mechanical dinosaur with a very large nose. Paris Hilton inside a very specific part of Mr. Slave's anatomy. Mel Gibson covered in things that should not be on television. Britney Spears being photographed to death by a mob that believed deep down that they were just doing what communities do. Harry and Meghan on a talk show holding signs about their privacy. Al Gore being apologized to, genuinely, 11 years after the show had mocked his warnings. These are not stories about bad people being punished. They're stories about the specific human condition of having too much insulation from the ordinary experience of being a person in the world, and what that insulation does to your ability to hear yourself. The show has been documenting this condition for 28 years, and it is as relevant now as it was when the first episode aired to fewer than 1 million cable subscribers. The night is quiet. The lights are low. If you've made it this far, you've been here for a long time, and I'm grateful for the company. If you enjoyed this and you want to make sure the next one finds you, go ahead and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than I can explain. And if you have a favorite South Park celebrity episode that we didn't get to tonight, Saddam Hussein in Hell, the Jennifer Lopez sock puppet, Bono learning the truth about himself, James Cameron and his creed, drop it in the comments. Tell me which one sits with you. Tell me which one changed how you thought about something. This is North Park. We'll be back with another one soon. Sleep well.